We're continuing to look at methods of how to make decisions when we have uncertainty. And so we're continuing our prescriptive analytics in terms of what should we do. Now, a method for prescriptive analytics is simulations or Monte Carlo simulations. So if we're going to do a Monte Carlo simulation, the way that it works is that we first need to figure out what formula we're trying to optimize. So we need some kind of formula where we're trying to find the best solution. Okay, now we're going to then have constraints that exist that are going to lead us to what makes a solution more optimal. And then we need to know which variables are unknown. So the whole thing is making decisions with uncertainty. So there's potential variability in some of the numbers that go into our formula, right? So we need to know which variables we know with certainty and which variables are subject to uncertainty. Then we ask ourselves, what's the likely distribution that explains the possible values of the uncertain variable? So just to kind of give you an example here, we'll come back to these, but let's suppose that you are trying to figure out if your company is sufficiently profitable to maintain a loan. And so the condition of the company's loan is that you have to maintain an interest coverage ratio above 1.5. So you need to calculate your interest coverage ratio, which is based on your earnings before interest and tax, and it's based on the interest expense. Well, suppose that there is some uncertainty. What if our revenue fluctuates so that our earnings before interest and tax might change? What if some of our costs change? So earnings is going to be based on first our revenue stream, but we also have to look at the costs. That's going to ultimately determine how much earnings we have. So there's some variability in this particular problem. And so we want to know what is the likelihood that we're going to keep that interest coverage ratio above the 1.5 necessary for the loan. So in our Monte Carlo simulation, what formula are we trying to optimize? We're trying to optimize our interest coverage ratio. What constraints exist? And so if we're looking at this one here, the interest coverage ratio needs to be above 1.5. That's the constraint there. It can be better than that, but it needs to be at least 1.5. All right. Then the other thing we look at is which variables are known and which variables are subject to uncertainty. So if we're looking at the calculation here, we know that our tax rate, and so that would be known. So in this case, there's a 35% tax rate. But where there's uncertainty is in the revenue, how much we're bringing in, and then our costs. Oh, sorry, the 35% is not taxes. It's the variable cost percentage. So the variable costs vary with revenue. And so so let's break this down. Profitability, money coming in, money going out. Our revenue is the money coming in, right? So if this example, if we make $10 million, but then we have to pay for things, and the money going out can be a fixed expense, so it's a set dollar amount, or it can be a variable cost. That is, the more you produce, sell, whatever, the more the cost goes up. So we have to ask ourselves, is that variable cost fixed at 35%, or could it vary? Maybe it's fixed. But what we don't know is the revenue. And then the question is, are our fixed costs known? So if those are known variables, then that's not going to change. And so we have to identify which variables we actually know and which variables are subject to uncertainty. Sorry, I don't know why I said taxes, because of course it's earnings before taxes. So there shouldn't be any taxes in the EBIT. All right, so where we have variables that are uncertain, then we need to figure out a distribution that explains the possible values. Well, we take stats, we can talk about the normal distribution, but what we're going to do in our next video is we're going to look at lots of other distributions besides the normal distribution that your variable might have. So once you know what the general distribution is of those variables that have uncertainty, then we can randomly generate values from those distributions, use those values to calculate the formula, and then see, does the formula still meet the constraints? We repeat 6, 7, and 8. We keep cycling through with different randomly generated values, put them into the formula, see if it meets the constraint, and ultimately we want to know what percentage of time was the formula optimized and the constraints met. And so we can perform a sensitivity analysis to test the boundaries and the assumptions to see if we are able to maintain those constraints and maximize or optimize whatever we're looking for. So the next video we're going to look at is all the distributions. And then after that, we will come back and we will look at this particular example here. But before we just leave this introduction to Monte Carlo simulations, why might you do one? Well, in finance, you want to look at the impact of variability on stock prices, on interest rates. In project management, and we'll do a video specific to the project management duration of a project, we'll use the Monte Carlo simulation to figure out the probability of completing the project on time. We can also use this to figure out variability in the cost of the project and figure out whether or not it's going to be within cost. So maybe we estimated to the customer how much it was going to cost to do something. Are we going to be able to stick to that? Or maybe you're just trying to report to your boss whether or not you're going to come in under budget. In marketing and economics, we might want to look at the impact on sales due to some economic variability, changes in demand, changes in cost or inflation. We could look at the impact on our business because of decisions outside of our control, whether or not we receive patents, whether or not we receive government approval. In pharmaceuticals, whether or not we make it to the next stage of our clinical trials. So we can use the Monte Carlo simulations to simulate the impact that it has depending on what's likely to happen. And so you can see how this is very much related to the decision trees videos that we have previous. In operations, we can optimize the supply chain by modeling the impact of trade policy changes, foreign exchange rate fluctuations, probability of equipment failures, probability of defects in our product, probability of labor shortages, transport disruptions. So we run these simulations to see how much we are impacted financially when there is variability in what could happen. So we're going to take a look at some of these. We'll look at the project management and the duration of a project. And then we'll also look at our simple example here of whether or not we'll be able to maintain that interest coverage ratio that we need in order to be sufficiently profitable to maintain the loan.